And what happens with complexity is people get befuddled by it, and then inaction sets in, and nothing happens. And what we've set out to do with our leader development programs is to grow leaders that can see their way through complexity and have the courage to take appropriate action to move things forward. And what we say is we want leaders who are very, very good at their core competency, whatever that may be. If you're an infantryman, be a great infantryman. If you're an ordnance officer, be a great ordnance officer. But then we also want our leaders to be broad enough to deal with a range of challenges, to be able to step outside their core competency into a non-comfort zone, and then be able to deal with that and come up with innovative solutions to do that. And we're structuring a leader development program that allows them to do that. Because our leaders have to understand, one, other cultures. And Frank, let's be candid. Our education system in the United States doesn't necessarily focus on teaching our young men and women to be comfortable in other cultures. And so we have to pretty much do that from scratch. But they not only have to understand the other culture, but they have to understand it well enough so they can use it to accomplish their objectives. And they also have to be able to use influence to benefit from the tools that can be provided by the other agencies of the government. To be comfortable and use influence to get effects that are outside of your control. And so those are the types of skills that we're trying to build into our leaders. And you don't do that just by staying in the operational force and going to war continually. And we're trying to set up what we call broadening experiences, where you step out of the operational force and you go to graduate school at a civilian university, you go train with industry, you go work in another agency of the government. I mean, the Brits do this very well. I mean, if you read there's a book called The Great Game about Afghanistan. I mean, they would say to Lieutenant, would you mind taking about 3 years and mapping out a route from Kabul to Beijing? And then the lieutenant would go off with his notebook, and he'd show up 3 years later back in London and say, here's the map. I mean, you imagine the growth that officer experienced while doing that? Winston Churchill got sent off to Cuba when he was lieutenant, and he spent the summer wandering around the jungles of Cuba, trying to understand what was going on there. Again, a hugely broadening experience. We're trying to work that into our culture. And I'll tell you, it's hard for us because, I mean, I grew up and everybody said, Casey, stay in that battalion. Stay where the rubber meets the road. Don't get out of there. You'll never make colonel. Well, we got to balance that a little bit because we're not going to get the types of officers that we need and non-commissioned officers if they just stay in the operational force. We got to step outside that, do things like the great folks over here are doing to learn a different side of the Army. So that's what we're looking for. Study hard. Good.
My husband is currently deployed, but knowing I was coming here sent me a question, so I hope you'll indulge.
Isn't that great? Isn't that great? What's his name?
They'll be listening tomorrow in Hungary on their way to Afghanistan in January, so fear not. Integral to the success of counterinsurgencies we are currently fighting is patience. National willpower has repeatedly become our strategic center of gravity in low-intensity conflicts. Strategists get this. Students at the Combat Advisor Development course at Fort Polk are taught that, and conventional forces 8 years in are finally starting to adopt a culture of patience. Insurgents have always inherently understood the need for patience. Where the information operations campaign lags, however, is in our own media and in American homes. 8 years is a long time, but almost negligible in a counterinsurgency. Can you please elaborate on why patience on a multinational level is so vital to a counterinsurgency and how its necessity may be better communicated to the American public in order to bolster national willpower at a time when it may seem ripe to begin waning?
Wow. Wow. My thumbs got tired just listening to that. I candidly, I couldn't say it any better than he did. That's exactly right. These are, as I said, this is a long-term proposition. And we need to understand that as a country. And believe me, sending our men and women in harm's way is not an easy decision for anyone at any level. But the stakes of not doing that are so high for our country that we have to be in this until we succeed. And it does take patience. And it's hard. There's no doubt about it. And everything, believe me, again, go back to my Iraq experience, everything takes longer than you think. If it was easy, we would have done it already, believe me. And so it does absolutely take patience. It takes patience at the national and the international level, as your husband said. So I couldn't do it much more justice than he already did. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Powers, United States Army Recruiting Command here in Cleveland. Sir, I agree with you on the strategy as we demonstrated in Iraq with training indigenous forces, with the Iraqi Special Operations Brigade. Absolutely great enabler and, a way to go into those issues like Sadr City. But to the leader question, this is a room full of leaders here in Cleveland and Northern Ohio. What can some of these folks do to help us with our job of filling the force and supporting the Army? Because there's a lot of vets here, there's a lot of patriotic Americans. Ohio's a very patriotic state. A lot of people really want to help us out, but they're not quite sure how. Can you give them some ideas, sir?
Yeah, man, that's a great point, because, as I said, we're in our 9th year of war now, and we're doing that with less than 1% of the population serving in the armed forces of the United States, and the burdens of this war only get harder on the men and women that are fighting it. A couple things. One. We have, the Army is a place of great opportunity, both on the military and the civilian side. And we have opportunities for young men and women in just a huge number of career fields, again, both on the military and the civilian side. And so there's an opportunity there to come in and build a career and be part of something that's larger than yourself, and to be part of an organization that is, frankly, the best in the world at what it does. So that's one. And to encourage young men and women to take advantage of that opportunity, I think is a great thing. The second, and I mentioned earlier, what employers do for our guardsmen and reservists. We could not have done, and nor can we continue to do what we're doing without the Guard and Reserve. And they couldn't do it without the support of their employers and their families. The third thing I'd tell you is, I mentioned that more than 5,000 soldiers have given their lives. They've left more than 20,000 loved ones behind. And they're all over the country. And they need assistance. And so reaching out to their surviving spouses and families of men and women who've given their lives, I think, is something that would be greatly beneficial. Fourth, the wounded warriors have got a lot of attention, and I must say I see great support across the country for the wounded warriors. I had the opportunity to take a bunch of them up to Yankee Stadium for the first game of the World Series, and things like that happen all across the country every day. And I just encourage you to, when you have the opportunity, to continue to participate.
Thank you, General.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing you gives me comfort. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to General George William Casey, Jr., Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Thank you, General. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned. Great, really. I'm one of those inherent liberal Democrats, and a little cynical of everything.